Under the leadership of Alan Dulles, Helms began to formulate Operation MK Ultra. Ultra was a wave to the World War II operation that broke Nazi codes, and MK probably stood for mind control. Officially, MK Ultra was established on April 13th, 1953, at Richard Helms' suggestion as ultra-sensitive work. The focal point of MK Ultra was the use of humans as unwitting subjects without their knowledge. The CIA sponsored numerous experiments of this kind, regardless of a report by the CIA's Inspector General in 1963 recommending that the termination of testing on unwitting subjects. DCI Richard Helms continued to advocate covert testing on the grounds that we are less capable of staying up with the Soviet advances in this field. On the subject of moral issues, Helms commented, "We have no answer to the moral issue." Helms and the CIA had no moral issue about using unwitting citizens for MK Ultra mind control and drug experiments. All right, we're talking about Bloom, the German Bloom, the Dr. Bloom, hardcore Nazi. So in March of 1945, Bloom fled from Posen just ahead of the Red Army. He was unable to destroy evidence of his experiments. On May 17, 1945, he was taken into custody in Munich by U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps. The Alsos mission was an organized effort by a team of United States military, scientific, and intelligence personnel to discover enemy scientific developments during World War II. Its chief focus was on the Nazi SS nuclear energy program, but it also investigated both chemical and biological weapons and the means to deliver them. One of Blom's principal responsibilities during the Nazi regime had been to report on the political reliability of German scientists and technicians. Therefore, his knowledge was invaluable to Alsos in helping the United Kingdom and the United States to identify Nazi and SS weapons experts who might work for them. The Alsos mission was commanded by Colonel Boris Pash, a former Manhattan Project security officer with Samuel Goldsmith as chief scientific advisor. It was jointly staffed by the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Office of Scientific Research and Development, the Manhattan Project, and Army Intelligence. He was subsequently arrested as a Nazi war criminal and tried at the doctor's trial in 1947 on charges of practicing euthanasia and conducting experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Blom admitted he had worked on Nazi SS bacteriological warfare projects and had experimented on concentration camp prisoners with bubonic plague and sarin gas at Auschwitz. However, in a shocking decision, Blom was acquitted. It was widely believed that he was saved from the gallows by clandestine American intervention. In return, we all know where this is going. Blom provided information and assistance to the U.S. and Great Britain on germ warfare. Dr. Blom was a mass-murdering psychopathic personality. He was a fiend that promised Himmler and the Third Reich the mother of all chemical weapons of mass destruction to wipe out Allied forces to end World War II once and for all to ensure a Nazi victory. In 1951, Dr. Blom was officially hired and paid by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps under Project 63, which was one of the successors to Operation Paperclip. We all know this. He was employed at the European Command Intelligence Center at Oberusel, West Germany, and worked on a chemical warfare project. Dr. Blom also conducted secret research on viruses and cancer. Batchelor and Frank Olson were assigned to the program at Camp King in Germany, where Dr. Blom was chief physician. They recruited and worked directly under Dr. Blom after the fall of Nazi Germany. Their assignment, according to documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act and interviews with Olson's former partner, Norman Konoyer, was to use unconventional interrogation techniques on Soviet prisoners, including dosing them with LSD. April 1950, Frank Olson was issued a diplomatic passport. Olson was not a diplomat. The passport allowed him to carry items in a diplomatic pouch that would not be subject to searches by customs officials. Olson began taking trips to Germany, flying to Frankfurt and making the short drive out to Camp King. In one of the rare surviving official documents from the program, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence Alan Dulles sent a secret memo to Richard Helms and CIA Director for plans Frank Wisner regarding the specific kinds of interrogation techniques that would be used. Still to this day. A lot of them still use this to the day. Okay. Quote, in our conversation of 9 February 1951, I outlined to you the possibilities of augmenting the usual interrogation methods by the use of drugs, hypnosis, shock, etc., and emphasized the defensive aspects as well as the offensive opportunities in the field of applied medical science, wrote Dulles. The enclosed folder, Interrogation Techniques, was prepared in my medical division to provide you with a suitable background. Camp King was the perfect location to conduct these radical trials. Overseas locations were performed for artichoke interrogations, explained Dulles, since foreign governments permitted certain activities which were not permitted by the U.S. government. The next trip on record made by Frank Olson occurred on June 2, 1952. Olson arrived at Frankfurt from the Hendon Military Airport in England and made the short drive west into Oberrussel. There, artichoke interrogation experiments were taking place at a safe house called Haus Waldorf. Between June 4, 1952 and June 18, 1952, an ISO and CIA inspection and security office team applied artichoke techniques to 2 operational cases in a safe house. The 2 individuals being interrogated at the Camp King safe house could be classed as experienced professional type agents and suspected of working for Soviet intelligence. These were Soviet spies captured by the Nazi SS spy ring and the Gehlen organization, now being run by the CIA. In the first case, light dosages of drugs coupled with hypnosis were used to induce a complete hypnotic trance. This trance was held for approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes of interrogation, with a subsequent total amnesia produced. The plan for the enhanced interrogation program was meant to be straightforward: drug the spies, interrogate the spies, and give them amnesia to make them forget. The clandestine experiment operations that took place at Camp King in Germany, headed by Nazi SS doctors, evolved into MK Ultra. That is how it began. Olson also appeared to have had deep misgivings about the illegal and inhumane use of secret Nazi mass murder biological and chemical weapons in the Korean aggression 1950 to 1953. During the Korean War, the U.S. killed up to 30% of its population. Okay. Okay. If any of this information had been exposed publicly, Olson, it would have caused a diplomatic and Nuremberg international massive human rights violation, war crimes crisis. It absolutely should have. Frank Rudolph Olson was assassinated, tossed through his hotel window like a rag doll on November 28, 1953. Getting back to Donny. Donny Hathaway was signed by Atco Records and Herbert Abramson, Atlantic Records Company. Atlantic Records was founded in 1947 by Turkish, former Swiss, French, and United Kingdom citizen Ahmet Erdogan and Herb Abramson, okay, who was his family's Jewish former U.S. U.S. Army dentist. Erdogan and Jerry Wexler signed him in 1969, okay, with his first hit single for the Atco label, The Ghetto, okay. In early 1970, Rolling Stone magazine marked him as a major new force in soul music. Donny's very rare quality as an extremely gifted musician became well known in the corporate entertainment industry by 1970. According to a psychopathology profile of Donny, he began to exhibit odd behavior and severe episodes of depression in 1970. Okay. In 1970, one of the most dangerous and clandestine figures of the 20th century was CIA Director Richard McGarrah Helms, the father of MK Ultra, Olson's CIA superior. Helms created just such a rule in MK Ultra and spent his entire career trying to perfect it through testing drugs on unwitting subjects, carrying out hypno-programming experiments, and plotting coups, assassinations, and cover-ups while manipulating others. By 1971, wife and friends said Donny became delusional. By the end of 1973, he allegedly dropped out of public sight to deal with his mental illness until just before his death on March 13, 1979. We now know that wasn't exactly the case. Donny had been removed, and it looks like involuntarily committed and confined to an MK Ultra mental institution by Erdogan and Atlantic Records. They controlled whether he left or stayed in the mental institution, not Donny, his wife, or family. Okay, here we go. He was a Frankfurt School of Thought philosopher, socialist, and music composer. It is believed that Adorno of the Frankfurt School had been implanted at Atlantic Records during the 1940s. Behind the veil, Adorno was the mysterious German professor engineering and controlling the company's sound like a dictator. The story about Atlantic's first sound engineer is intriguing. Atlantic moved out of a Washington, D.C., and into a building at 234 West 56th Street in New York in 1947. There, a German professor helped a young businessman record their first jazz albums. Erdogan told this story many times, but no one ever found out who the German professor actually was. There are clues, though. According to Erdogan, the studio had this German professor who did the bulk of the engineering. The professor was a little middle-aged German doctor who was really difficult to work with. Erdogan claimed that the professor wouldn't let us turn up the bass or touch anything, but we were told he was a master, so we put up with him. Why was the German social scientist Theo Adorno controlling the sound studio at Atlantic Records? Most of the following comes from the cybernetics to Littleton techniques of mind control by Jeffrey Steinberg. Immediately after World War II, when there was a concerted effort launched by the Frankfurt School and the London Tavistock Institute to use Marxist Freudian perversion of psychology and other social sciences as instruments for mass social control and brainwashing, the two pillars of the assault on the American intellectual tradition were cybernetics and the drug counterculture. Lord Bertrand Russell of the Frankfurt School was an advocate for clandestine mass social engineering. In his 1951 book, The Impact of Science on Society, he wrote, "Its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. Religion plays a part through a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. It may be hoped that in time anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment." Russell continued, "The subject will make great strides when it is taken up by the scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black." Wow. This is insane. Russell's description of a scientific dictatorship was matched by the account of Aldous Huxley, author of utopian tack Brave New World. In a speech on the U.S. State Department's Voice of America in 1961, of a world where pharmacologically manipulated slaves living in a concentration camp of the mind, enhanced by propaganda and psychotropic drugs, learning to love their servitude and abandoning all will to resist. This is the final revolution. Speaking at the California Medical School in San Francisco, Huxley announced there will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing a dictatorship without tears, so to speak. Producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire society so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it. Jesus Christ. Jiminy Cricket. Because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. Theodor Adorno was born Theodor Ludwig Wiesengrund, 1903 to 1969, to a Jewish family in Frankfurt, Germany. In May 1944, the American Jewish Committee established a Department of Scientific Research, which was headed by Frankfurt School director Max Horkheimer. Horkheimer established a project called Studies in Prejudice with generous funding from the AJC and other agencies, including the Rockefeller Foundations. The Studies in Prejudice employed a number of Frankfurt School members such as Herbert Marcuse and Franz Neumann. That's the guy with the microphone, the Neumann microphone. That's him. If you have a Neumann microphone, that's because of him. But all these guys were into sound, right? Herman Weil, all those guys that were into synthesizers and keyboards, they came after him, Franz Neumann. Okay, that were brought into the research and analysis section of the OSS and with Dulles, Helms, and Colonel White. Adorno worked on SIP, and under Horkheimer's direction, they all formally reconstituted the International Institute of Social Research, the transplanted incarnation of the original Frankfurt School of Weimar, Germany. Okay. The SIP studies propose to create a cultural paradigm shift away from the so-called authoritarian matrix of man in the living image of God. They propose to transform the American culture toward a erotic, perverse matrix associated with the present politically correct tyranny of tolerance for dehumanizing drug abuse, sexual perversion, and the glorification of violence. Adorno was a psychopathic personality. In his 1948 work on the philosophy of modern music, Adorno argued that the purpose of modern music is to literally drive the listener insane. He justified this by asserting that modern society was a hotbed of evil authoritarianism and potential fascism, and that only by first destroying civilization through the spread of all forms of cultural pessimism and perversity could liberation occur. On the role of modern music, he wrote, "It is not that schizophrenia is directly expressed therein, but the music imprints upon itself an attitude similar to that of the mentally ill. The individual brings about his own disintegration. He imagines the fulfillment of the promise through music, or through magic, through magic, but nonetheless within the realm of immediate actuality. Its concern is to dominate schizophrenic traits through the aesthetic consciousness. In doing so, it would hope to vindicate insanity as true health. Necrophilia," he added, "is the ultimate expression of true health in this sick society." Here we go here. One of the main ideas of the Frankfurt School was to exploit Freud's idea of pansexualism, the search for indiscriminate sexual pleasure, the promotion of unisex, the blurring of distinctions between the sexes, the overthrowing of traditional relationships between men and women, pay attention, and finally the undermining of heterosexuality at the expense of homosexuality, as for examples in the idea of same-sex marriage and the adoption of children by homosexual couples. This is the 1950s. This is the 1950s. They had this shit planned out. Oh my God. Wow. Under the growing influence of Christianity around the 1st century AD, the pagan sun cults of Mithras were essentially outlawed and driven underground. Powerful forces of the secret pagan sun cults, like the Frankfurt School, have been committed to effecting an erosion and destruction of Christianity and its influence from within. As they erode Christianity, the underground and outlawed sun cults of Mithras are arising, dropping the veils of secular disguise to become the explicit and open worship of the Cybele, Mithras, and Satan or Baal, Lucifer. Mm, mm, mm. Powerful institutions, academic universities, oligarchies, and now the U.S. government is bent on eradicating the kind of institutional forms of society which Christianity and true human nature demand and require the work of the divine. The persistent erosion of society's core Christian values open people of weak character and constitution to be recruited, and victims, including children, to be kidnapped, ritually abused, brainwashed, and mind controlled to act as a force for evil. A form of evil like the ancient Phrygian cult Cybele Dionysus. Wow, okay. Theodore Adorno had been employed at Atlantic Records to make sure it happened with popular folk music on an established scientific basis. It was the Frankfurt School clandestine company mission, policy, and principle since it began in 1947. Adorno was a vivid racist that looked at black culture through the lens of wickedness, prejudice, and bias. He hated black jazz. He preached among the elite institutions that there was nothing spiritual or special about it. He dismissed black jazz as a debasement of music. He found no authenticity in jazz and sneered at the skin of the Negro as well as the silver of the saxophone were only colorist effects. In his essays on jazz, Adorno perpetuated this prejudice by confining his analysis to the commercialistic white jazz of big-name swing bands and flagrantly denying or belittling the black contribution to jazz. Adorno refused to acknowledge the autonomy, complexity, creativity, and ancient history of African cultural forms of music. If the black contributed anything to jazz, claimed Adorno, it was its origins in the blacks, half resentful, half complacent submission to slavery expressed in spirituals and slave songs. Wow. In 1947, Adorno was called away from Atlantic Records. He was replaced by Tom Dowd, a Columbia University student straight from the Osred's super ultra secret Alsos mission. Manhattan Project, Dowd, okay. With ultra sensitive top secret military and government clearances, had a degree from NY's Columbia University in nuclear physics. Holy cow. The purpose of his work was the Manhattan Project is still classified in secret. And this is the guy you bring in from one crazy sound engineer to the another crazy sound engineer. This is insane. Dowd had recorded Donny and Roberta Flack. He was vice president of Atlantic Records sound engineering department. He was most likely the sound engineer on January 13, 1979, and heard Donny talking about white people were trying to kill him and had connected his brain to a machine for the purpose of stealing his music and his sound. Flack was managed at Atlantic by company VP Ottoman Empire Turkish-born record producer and arranger Arif Mardin, who also may have been there. Luther Vandross would have been there too, but he is dead. Yeah. Okay. This photo here. Okay, this photo was taken from an Aretha Franklin session for Until You Come Back to Me, where he was playing electric piano. Arif Mardin was most likely another clandestine Sabbatine guardian the hen house. Sabbatine Frankists, also referred to as the cult of the All-Seeing Eye. They are everywhere there is power. Okay, they are the good guys and the bad guys. The World War II era is a prime example. The following leaders were members of the cult of the All-Seeing Eye: Sabbatine Frankists: Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Adolf Hitler, Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius VII, Francisco Franco, Benito Mussolini, Hirohito, and Mao Zedong. Okay. At Atlantic, Donny was surrounded by a circle of the Watchers. Okay. Donny was a devoted Christian, spreading the love of Christ and his music among the masses as a living testament of his faith. Donny and his extraordinary talent had been trapped in the hellhole at Atlantic Records. They wanted to turn his remarkable God-given talent into a force for evil or totally destroy it. Okay. Don't get it twisted. Erdogan and at Atlantic Records had no love for black culture and its forms of music. According to Erdogan's partner Jerry Wexler, Atlantic was in the business of taking the gospel songs and putting the devil's words to them. Ray Charles. They weren't representing the black culture, but a self-destructive black subculture. They were promoting icons that spoke for society's underbelly: unrestrained sexuality, violence, and drugs. Ahmet Erdogan was raised in Turkey as a Muslim. However, he belonged to a secret Turkish Kabbalistic American Israeli Zionist circle related to the Sabbatines for decades. Okay. We get to Kissinger. We already know about Kissinger. Okay. Okay. They moved out of the building to a new building. Okay. Got that already. Okay. Erdogan was also well connected with powerful figures of the Zionist satanic cabals in the American shadow government. He sat on the board of the RAND Center for Middle East Public Policy Advisory Board with former U.S. Defense Department Secretary Frank Carlucci. Carlucci was also the chairman of the Carlyle Group, a defense contractor with ties to 9/11 inside job, former president and CIA director George Bush Sr., the Saudi royal family, and the Bin Ladens. Okay. 1979, the Essex House Hotel in New York, where Donny was murdered, was owned and managed by J. Willard Marriott. Nobody could tell J. Willard that he wasn't the highest of the high. He dined with U.S. presidents, heads of government and state, and the elite of the elite. He was more than a friend to the CIA. Marriott was a Masonic Latter-day Saint high priest. He was a Washington, D.C. All-Highest Stake High Council president for a decade in 1973. In the Mormon Church, a stake is an administrative unit composed of multiple congregations or wards. A stake may be compared to a diocese in the Roman Catholic Church. The name stake derives from the metaphor employed by Isaiah comparing Zion to a tent fastened securely by stakes. That's the hotel owner. Okay. Marriott also belonged to the Greek society Phi Delta Theta, their patron Greek divinity as Pallas Athena and her owl. Marriott was one of the leading principal figures behind the President Richard Nixon creep in Watergate. He was behind Nixon's presidential inaugural and the committee for the re-election of the president. Besides his re-election activities, Creep illegally laundered money and slush funds and was deeply involved in secret financing the infamous CIA Watergate burglary. Marriott provided cover for Donald Nixon, president's brother, fronting for Howard Hughes. The Howard Hughes syndicate was a front for the CIA. To cover Donald Nixon, Marriott hired him as a newly hired vice president of the Marriott Corps. Donald Nixon had deep cover for CIA slush funds laundered out of the Howard Hughes outfit. And to travel the world, he dined with right-wing Nazi officials of the Greek military junta and met with Venezuelan cabinet ministers. Donald Nixon made 2 secret trips to Greece for a $10 million loan from Marriott Corporation during the time Republicans were seeking money to silence the Watergate defendants. Cheesy Pete. Wait. Let me see how long.